Have you ever watched a dream die in someone else's eyes? It's a quiet, devastating thing. I saw it happen on a perfect Saturday afternoon in mid-June. The Denver sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air in our friend's backyard was thick with the scent of grilled hot dogs and the sweet, cloying perfume of pink and blue frosting. It was a gender reveal party, a ritual of modern hope that felt both foreign and strangely touching to me. As a 34-year-old landscape architect, my life was about curated spaces, controlled growth, and the quiet satisfaction of a blueprint realized. I was single by choice, my independence a garden I'd meticulously cultivated. So, I watched the confetti cannon explode in a shower of blue with genuine happiness for my friends, but also with the comfortable detachment of an observer. Then, my eyes found my sister. Lily stood near the immaculate rose bushes, a fixed smile plastered on her face that didn't reach her eyes. At 32, she was 2 years younger than me, but in that moment, she looked infinitely more fragile. Her hand rested unconsciously on her stomach, a gesture of phantom motherhood that sent a familiar ache through my own chest. She was watching the mother-to-be laugh, her hand on her own swollen belly, and I saw Lily's mask crack for just a second. I saw the dream wither. No one else seemed to notice. Her husband, Mark, was busy congratulating the happy father-to-be, his broad back turned to his wife's silent anguish. He was a good man, blinded by a desperate, all-consuming love for Lily and their shared dream. I started moving towards her, navigating the clusters of laughing guests, but she caught my eye and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not here. The message was clear. I was, as always, her designated keeper of secrets, her emotional safe house. The drive home was a cocoon of silence, the city lights blurring past the windows of my car. The forced cheerfulness of the party evaporated, leaving a heavy, unspoken truth between us. I didn't push. I just drove, the steady hum of the engine a placeholder for the words neither of us knew how to say. We were halfway across town when the first sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound that seemed torn from her very soul. I pulled over into the empty parking lot of a closed-down diner, the old neon sign casting a pale, ghostly light. I killed the engine, and in the sudden, profound quiet, Lily finally broke. "It happened again, Tess," she whispered, the words fractured by tears. "2 weeks ago. I didn't want to tell anyone. I thought maybe this time." She didn't need to elaborate. The "it" was another miscarriage, another soul that had briefly flickered and then gone out. I unbuckled my seatbelt and wrapped my arms around her. Her body trembled against mine, the full force of her grief finally unleashed in the privacy of my car. "I'm so sorry, Lee," I murmured into her hair, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "I'm so sorry." She cried for the baby, for the string of babies that never were. She cried for her body, which she now saw as a traitor. I felt her despair seep into me, a cold, heavy tide. Her grief was a physical weight in the small space of my car, and I, her big sister, did the only thing I knew how to do. I shouldered it with her. I held her and let her pour out the pain, the anger, and the crushing unfairness of it all. In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of a forgotten diner, I would have done anything to heal her. I truly believed that her pain was something I could, and should, help her fix. It was the most dangerous assumption of my life. What is the sound of a door closing forever? It's not a slam, not a click. It's silence. A profound, suffocating silence that filled the 3 weeks following the gender reveal party. The raw grief from that night in my car had subsided, replaced by the low-frequency hum of dread. Lily and Mark were waiting for an appointment with a reproductive specialist, a last-ditch effort to find an answer, a reason, a fix. Hope had become a clinical procedure. I tried to keep things normal, calling Lily to talk about work or a new series on Netflix, but her voice was always distant, thin. The conversation would inevitably circle back to the unspeakable, the appointment hanging over them like a guillotine. I was leaving my office on a Tuesday, the plans for a rooftop garden in Cherry Creek tucked under my arm, when my phone rang. It was Mark. "Tessa, can you come over? We're back from the appointment." His voice was hollowed out, all the usual warmth and confidence gone. Their house, usually so full of light, and Lily's vibrant energy, felt like a tomb. The curtains were drawn against the bright afternoon sun, and 2 mugs of what looked like cold tea sat on the coffee table. Lily was curled on one end of the sofa, wrapped in an afghan despite the warmth of the day, looking small and lost. Mark stood by the window, his shoulders slumped. He was the one who finally broke the silence that had swallowed the room. "The doctor gave it a name," he began, his voice flat. "It's a rare uterine condition. Severe scarring from the past. Procedures. It means her uterine lining can't sustain a pregnancy." He took a breath, the words catching in his throat. "It's definitive, Tess." He said trying again would be cruel. "She can't carry a child to term. Ever." The word hung in the air, absolute and brutal. A verdict, not a diagnosis. The end of a story. I looked at Lily, expecting a fresh wave of tears, but her eyes were dry, vacant. The fight had gone out of her. It was as if the doctor had reached inside her and surgically removed all hope. I felt a surge of protective anger, a useless rage at the injustice of it all. What could I say? What comfort is there for a dream that has been officially declared dead? This was a pain beyond platitudes, a grief too deep for easy words. Then Mark said something that changed the quality of the silence. "But our embryos, they're perfect." He turned from the window, a strange, desperate light in his eyes. "We have 5 of them, Tess. Healthy, viable, frozen and waiting." The doctor said, "He said our only option is a gestational surrogate." A new word entered the room. Surrogate. It landed like a spark, a tiny flicker of light in the crushing darkness. I saw a hint of life return to Lily's expression. For a single, breathtaking second, there was a path forward. A different path, a complicated one, but a path nonetheless. I felt my own shoulders relax slightly. So there was a way, a technical solution. And then Mark delivered the final blow, the one that sealed the exit shut. The agency fees, the medical costs, the legal contracts. He said to budget around $150,000. He let out a short, bitter laugh. The cost of a house. For a chance. And just like that, the flicker of light was extinguished. $150,000. It might as well have been $1 billion. They had a good life, but they weren't wealthy. They had a mortgage, car payments, the normal financial pressures of 2 people in their early 30s. That sum was an impossible mountain. The dream wasn't just dead, it was being held for a ransom they could never, ever pay. We sat there, the 3 of us, trapped in a quiet, airless room where the only way out was blocked by a wall of money. The situation felt absolute, a perfect, inescapable prison. I had no idea they were already looking at me and seeing a key. Have you ever sat at a dinner table and realized you were the one being served up on a platter? That's what a family dinner became for me. It was a Sunday, 10 days after the verdict, and my parents had insisted on a meal to support Lily. Support. The word felt like a lie before the first dish was even passed. The air in their house was thick with the aroma of pot roast and the heavy metallic scent of unspoken tragedy. We were all playing our parts in a miserable stage play of normalcy. My father talked about the stock market. My mother fretted over whether the potatoes were too salty. Mark, bless his heart, tried to make a joke that fell into the cavernous silence between us. And Lily was a ghost at the feast. She pushed a single green bean around her plate with her fork, her eyes fixed on a future that had been stolen from her. I tried to fill the silence, talking about a challenging new project, but my words felt like pebbles tossed into a well, disappearing without a sound. The breaking point came over dessert, a store-bought apple pie that tasted like sawdust and good intentions. There was a lull, a moment where no one was even pretending to eat anymore. My mother looked at Lily's tear-streaked face, then her gaze shifted, landing on me. A strange, calculating light flickered in her eyes. "You know," she said, her voice soft and dangerously thoughtful, "it's such a blessing that we have Tessa." It was dropped into the conversation so casually, so innocently, you could have almost missed the sound of the pin being pulled from a grenade. Every head at the table turned towards me. The focus of the entire room shifted, the immense weight of their collective grief and hope landing squarely on my shoulders. Before I could even process what was happening, Mark leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table as if in prayer. "She's right," he said, his voice brimming with a terrifying, sudden hope. "Tessa, you're our family. You're healthy. You're not married." He let the words hang there, a clinical assessment of my life, my choices, my body. The room began to shrink, the walls closing in. The faces of my family blurred into a single expectant stare. Mark's voice pressed on, gathering momentum, fueled by the sudden, intoxicating possibility of a solution. A solution that was me. It would be the perfect solution, the only solution. He looked from my parents to Lily, then back to me, his eyes pleading. "You would carry our baby for us." He didn't ask. He stated it as fact, a logical conclusion to a problem they had just solved. In that instant, I ceased to be a person. I was no longer Tessa, the landscape architect who loved her independence, who cherished her quiet, ordered life. I was a vessel, a walking, talking, healthy uterus that, in their eyes, was currently going to waste. The silence that followed his words was the loudest sound I had ever heard. They were all looking at me, not with malice, but with a blinding, desperate love for Lily that had made me invisible. They saw a key. They saw a cure. They didn't see me at all. How do you say no when the question itself is a trap? The silence in the dining room stretched, thin and brittle. In my mind, I was screaming, a primal roar of disbelief and violation, but no sound came out. I could only stare at their faces, these people who formed the very bedrock of my life. My mother, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of hope. My father, his expression stern but certain, as if he'd just solved a complex logistical problem. And Mark, leaning forward, a drowning man reaching for a life raft that was my body. My gaze finally settled on Lily. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her hands, now twisting a napkin in her lap. Was she a part of this? Was this ambush her idea? The question felt like a shard of glass in my throat. I had to say something. The words formed slowly, carefully, because I knew that any misstep would be catastrophic. I had to make them understand, without declaring a war I wasn't sure I could survive. "Guys," I began, my voice raspy, unfamiliar to my own ears. "I love you. I love all of you so much. And Lee?" I looked at my sister, forcing her to meet my eyes. "My heart is broken for you." I paused, letting the truth of that statement settle. "But this, what you're asking, it's not something I can do." I took a steadying breath, trying to anchor myself to the reality of my own life. This is 9 months of my life, my career, my body, my health. It's everything. The reaction was not anger. It was something far worse. A cold, unified wall of incomprehension. It was as if I had just started speaking in a language they'd never heard. My perfectly reasonable points, the cornerstones of my entire existence, simply bounced off them. My father was the first to speak, his voice laced with a patronizing disappointment that cut deeper than any shout. 9 months, he said, framing it as a simple mathematical equation. 9 months of inconvenience versus a lifetime of happiness for your sister. Is that really such a difficult choice, Tessa? His words stripped my life of all its value, reducing my autonomy, my ambitions, my very self, to a mere inconvenience. He had neatly packaged 9 months of hormonal changes, physical risks, emotional upheaval, and career stagnation into a tidy, dismissible box. I looked to my mother for support, for some sign of understanding, but her face was a mask of pained resolve. She was on their side. I was completely, utterly alone in this. Then came the final devastating blow. Lily finally looked up at me, her eyes brimming with the tears she'd been holding back all evening. Her voice was a barely audible whisper, designed for maximum impact, a precisely aimed arrow dipped in the poison of familial guilt. "I thought you loved me," she breathed. And with those 5 words, the ground gave way beneath me. She had done it. She had turned my refusal to sacrifice my body into a referendum on my love for her. It wasn't a request anymore. It was an ultimatum. And the price of saying no was being branded a loveless, selfish sister. Do you know what happens after you say no to the people you love? They don't hear a complete sentence. They hear a challenge. My one-word refusal at that disastrous Sunday dinner wasn't a wall. It was the starting pistol for a siege. The campaign began not with a bang, but with a ping. A notification on my phone the following Tuesday. It was a picture from Lily. No text, just an image of a newborn baby, swaddled in white, with impossibly tiny, wrinkled hands. Another one arrived the next day, a baby yawning. The day after, a baby in a ridiculously small knitted hat. These weren't random pictures. They were tactical munitions, precision-guided guilt bombs sent to breach my defenses. Then came the links. Articles and blog posts with titles like "The Greatest Gift," a surrogacy story, and "How My Sister Gave Me My Family." Each one was a carefully curated piece of propaganda, designed to showcase a world where women like me joyfully handed their bodies over for the greater good of the family. My phone, once a tool for work and connection, became a source of constant low-grade anxiety. Every notification made me flinch. My life, my career, my carefully constructed peace, none of it mattered. They were not trying to understand my perspective. They were trying to erase it, to carpet bomb my resolve with images of a life they wanted, a life that required the complete surrender of my own. I was no longer a sister. I was the lone holdout in a negotiation where my terms were deemed irrelevant. Then came the phone calls, the flanking maneuvers. Mark was the first to try. He called on a Thursday evening, his tone smooth and reasonable, as if our last conversation hadn't ended in a vortex of emotional blackmail. "Hey, Tess, just checking in, seeing how you are." He didn't mention the dinner. He talked about work, about a new grill he was buying, and then, ever so smoothly, he pivoted. "You know, I've been thinking about how amazing this could be, not just for me and Lily, but for all of us. It would bring our family so much closer." Closer? I almost laughed. We were being torn apart at the seams, and he was selling me a fantasy of unity. He spoke of the child not as a human being that would require 9 months of my life force to create, but as a project, a bonding exercise. As if I were being asked to help build a deck, not gestate a human. He was so blinded by his own desire that he saw my body as nothing more than a convenient construction site for his family's future happiness. The heaviest artillery, however, was my parents. My mother called that weekend, her voice thick with a sorrow that was 100% weaponized. "I just don't understand, Tessa," she began, skipping any pretense of a normal conversation. "I remember when you were just a little girl, maybe 10 years old, and Lily fell off her bike. You took care of her all afternoon. You put on the bandages, you read her stories. You were always there for her." She was mining my past for leverage, turning my childhood love into a lifelong contract of servitude. Every argument was a variation on the same theme. My sister's pain was the only pain that mattered. My life, my career, designing beautiful, serene spaces for others, was an abstraction. My body, which I had always considered my own sovereign territory, was now being viewed as a fallow field, a resource being selfishly hoarded. In their relentless, single-minded campaign, they had managed to do the impossible. They had made me feel like a stranger in my own life, a gatekeeper of a womb that they believed, with all their hearts, truly belonged to them. For 2 weeks, the siege had been relentless, a war of attrition fought with text messages and mournful phone calls. I was exhausted. Not just tired, but a deep, cellular exhaustion, as if my very bones were weary of holding my own ground. The breaking point arrived on a Wednesday evening, disguised as my mother standing on my doorstep, holding a lemon meringue pie, a peace offering, or, as I was about to find out, a Trojan horse. She sat on my couch, the pie between us on the coffee table like a fragile negotiator. She spoke of Lily's weight loss, of Mark's sleepless nights, her words weaving a familiar tapestry of guilt. I listened, my responses polite but firm, a series of carefully constructed barricades. But my politeness was no match for her desperation. "Tessa, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Just think about it. Really think about what this means to your sister." "I have thought about it, Mom," I said, my own voice dangerously calm. "I think about it every minute of every day, because you won't let me think about anything else. The answer is still no. It has to be no." My refusal, spoken so plainly, seemed to short-circuit something within her. The mask of sorrowful persuasion fell away, replaced by a raw, jagged frustration. She saw my boundary not as a form of self-preservation, but as a personal attack on her, on Lily, on the very concept of family. Her voice rose, shedding its gentle, pleading tone. "Why are you being so selfish? Do you have any idea how much she is suffering? We are talking about her entire life's happiness, and you just dismiss it." The injustice of her words, the sheer breathtaking blindness of them, finally ignited the fuse that had been shortening for weeks. All the logic, all the calm reasoning, it was all useless. It was time for the ugly biological truth. Selfish? I was on my feet, my body trembling with a rage I hadn't known I possessed. "You want to talk about selfish? You are asking me to hand over my body for almost a year. This isn't a car I can just lend you. This is my uterus, my body." The word, uterus, a clinical, anatomical term, hung in the air between us, raw and undeniable. It was the heart of the matter, the one thing they had all so carefully talked around. And then she said it. The words that would change everything, the phrase that would detonate the entire foundation of our relationship. She looked at me, not with the love of a mother, but with the cold appraisal of a farmer looking at barren land. In a blaze of fury, she shot back. "And what good is it if you're not going to use it for its purpose? You have it, and she needs it. You're just being greedy." There it was. The truth. Uglier and more brutal than I could have ever imagined. My body wasn't mine. In her eyes, it was a family utility, and by refusing to let them use it, I was simply hoarding a resource. In that moment, I understood. This was never about a favor. It was about a perceived debt, one she believed I owed them simply for existing. Have you ever been erased? Not physically, but in a way that's far more chilling. After my mother called me greedy and stormed out of my apartment, leaving the untouched pie on my coffee table like a sugary tombstone, I ceased to exist. The daily barrage of texts and calls stopped. The silence they left behind was louder and more terrifying than the noise had ever been. It was the silence of a verdict rendered. I had been judged and found wanting. I was no longer a daughter or a sister. I was a functional object that refused to perform. For 3 days, I moved through my life like a phantom. I went to work, reviewed blueprints for a new botanical garden, and spoke to clients about soil acidity and shade tolerance. But I was hollowed out. At night, the silence in my apartment was a physical presence. I would sit on my couch and stare at the wall, replaying my mother's words. Greedy. What good is it? They had looked at my life, my choices, my independence, and seen nothing but a selfish waste of a perfectly good uterus. The isolation was absolute, a cold, airless vacuum. On the fourth day, I found myself scrolling through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't called in months: Chloe, my cousin, the family's official black sheep. She had escaped to Portland a decade ago, trading our conservative Colorado family traditions for a life of craft breweries, rainy skies, and unapologetic self-determination. She was the only one who had ever challenged the unspoken family doctrine that individual needs were subordinate to the collective's. Calling her felt like a desperate, last-ditch flare fired from a deserted island. I was terrified she'd tell me I was wrong too. I took a deep breath and hit the call button, my heart hammering against my ribs. She answered on the second ring, her voice a blast of cheerful West Coast energy. "Tessa, holy crap, what's up? It's been forever." I tried to match her tone, but my voice came out as a weak croak. I stumbled through the pleasantries, and then, with my eyes squeezed shut, I told her everything. The miscarriages, the verdict, the dinner, the relentless pressure, and finally, my mother's brutal parting shot. The words tumbled out, disjointed and soaked in a shame I couldn't articulate. When I finished, there was a beat of pure, static silence on the other end of the line. I braced myself for the gentle letdown, the "I see their point," but instead, what came through the phone was a roar. "Are you fucking kidding me?" Chloe's voice was vibrating with a rage so pure it startled me. "They did what? They said what to you? Oh, I will fly to Denver and burn that entire house to the ground." Her anger wasn't directed at me. It was for me. It was a shield, a sword, a validation so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. For the next 20 minutes, she unleashed a torrent of furious, beautiful logic that I had been too beaten down to form myself. "It is your body, Tessa, your body, not a community rental property. The fact that you have a uterus does not mean you owe anyone a baby, especially not your sister. What they are doing is insane. It's monstrous." Each word was a brick, rebuilding the foundation they had systematically demolished. She wasn't just offering sympathy. She was arming me, reminding me that my no was not a selfish act, but a sacred right. When I hung up the phone, the silence in my apartment was still there. But it was different now. It was no longer the silence of isolation. It was the quiet of resolve. The call hadn't solved my problem, but it had given me back a piece of myself. I was not a monster. I was not a villain. I was a person who had been asked to set herself on fire to keep someone else warm. And thanks to my cousin, the black sheep who lived 1,000 miles away, I finally had the strength to put down the matches. I was no longer alone. I had an ally, and I knew the war was far from over. What is the price of silence? It's an invitation for the other side to get louder. My call with Chloe had forged a new spine of resolve within me. I stopped answering the pleading calls from my parents. I let Mark's long, rambling voicemails go unheard. I needed space. I needed to reclaim my own mind from their relentless occupation. I thought my silence was building a wall, but to them, it was just an obstacle to be demolished. They decided to bring the war to me. It happened on a Friday afternoon, a time in my office that usually hums with the quiet satisfaction of a week's work well done. I was in a deep focus state, finalizing the irrigation layout for a corporate campus, when my colleague Sarah tapped me on the shoulder. "Tessa," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Your sister and her husband are here, in the lobby." My blood ran cold. This was my sanctuary. This was the one place on earth that was wholly mine, a space governed by logic, creativity, and professionalism. It was a territory they had no right to invade. I walked out of my office and into the open-plan reception area. And there they were. They had staged themselves perfectly for maximum effect. Mark stood with a protective arm around Lily, who was visibly trembling, her face pale and streaked with fresh tears. They looked like refugees from a natural disaster, seeking shelter. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was standing near them, his expression a mask of professional sympathy. Every head in the office was turned in their direction. It wasn't an arrival. It was a calculated performance. Before I could say a word, Lily took a stumbling step towards me, her voice breaking on a sob. "Tessa, please, don't shut us out." She said it just loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "We're your family. We just want to talk to you. We're desperate." Mark stepped forward, his voice a low, earnest plea aimed not just at me, but at the entire audience they had cultivated. "We're sorry to bother you at work," he said, looking at Mr. Henderson, "but this is our only hope." The humiliation was a physical force, a wave of heat that washed over my face and down my neck. They had done it. They had crossed the one line I never thought they would dare to cross. They had brought their private, manipulative grief into my professional life, turning my colleagues into unwitting spectators. They were painting a picture for everyone to see. I was the cold, heartless villain, and they were the desperate victims of my cruelty. I was trapped. To get angry would be to prove them right. To cry would be a surrender. I looked at my sister, at her tear-drenched, pleading face, and for the first time, I felt no sympathy. All I felt was the cold, clear shock of betrayal. This wasn't about her pain anymore. This was a tactical nuclear strike designed to make my position so publicly untenable that I would have no choice but to capitulate. They hadn't just come to my office to talk. They had come to burn my world down. And as I stood there, frozen in the stunned silence of my violated sanctuary, I knew that my polite defensive war was over. They had left me no choice but to learn how to fight back. There are violations that leave no visible bruises. I drove home from my office in a state of clinical shock, the late afternoon traffic a muted, distant river of red and white lights. The humiliation was a metallic taste in my mouth. They hadn't just ambushed me. They had strategically detonated a bomb in the center of my life, targeting my professional credibility and my personal sanity in a single, devastating blast. Their desperation had finally curdled into cruelty. My polite refusals, my attempts at creating distance, they were like building a sandcastle against a hurricane. As I unlocked the door to my apartment, the quiet no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the eerie calm in the eye of the storm. They had escalated. They had changed the rules of engagement, turning a family dispute into a public spectacle. The question that echoed in the profound silence was no longer how to say no, but how to make them hear it. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of my colleagues' pitying faces burned into my memory. Love, I realized, was their greatest weapon. They had wielded it with surgical precision, knowing that the accusation of being unloving, of being a bad sister, was my deepest vulnerability. But they had pushed too far. They had mistaken my love for a weakness they could exploit indefinitely. They were wrong. At 3 in the morning, I sat at my laptop and typed a phrase that felt like a betrayal. Attorney for family harassment. The next afternoon, I found myself in a sterile downtown office with wood-paneled walls and a view of the city that felt a million miles away from my emotional chaos. I was speaking to a woman named Ms. Albright, a lawyer in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a demeanor of unshakable calm. As I recounted the story, from the first genius idea at the dinner table to the public shaming in my office lobby, I felt a strange sense of detachment. Laid out under the cold, fluorescent lights of a legal consultation, my family's campaign of persuasion looked exactly like what it was: a systematic, relentless campaign of psychological coercion. Ms. Albright listened without interruption, her pen scratching methodically across a yellow legal pad. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered something far more valuable: terminology. "What you're describing, Ms. Evans," she said when I had finished, her voice even and precise, "moves beyond a simple family disagreement. The persistent, unwanted contact and the deliberate interference at your place of employment legally constitute harassment." The word, spoken by her, was not an emotional accusation. It was a fact, a legal definition. It was a shield. She proposed a solution that was as radical as it was terrifyingly simple. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a letter. A formal, unequivocal communication, drafted by her office, to be sent via certified mail to my parents and to Lily and Mark. The letter would state, in the clearest possible legal terms, that my decision not to act as a surrogate was final and non-negotiable. It would state that any further attempts to contact me on this matter, and specifically any appearance at my workplace, would be considered harassment and would be met with legal action. It was an ultimatum, a declaration of independence written on law firm letterhead. As I sat there, the air humming with the quiet efficiency of her office, I felt a surge of both terror and profound relief. This was the weapon I needed. Not one of emotions, which they could always twist and turn against me, but one of cold, hard, and unforgiving consequences. "Draft it," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it was the strongest I had felt in months. "Send it." I was done building walls. It was time to draw a line in the sand, not with a stick, but with the full force of the law. What is the sound of a bomb squad arriving? It's the piercing silence that follows your desperate call for help. The lawyer's letter landed on a Tuesday. I know because I tracked the certified mail receipts online. For 72 hours, the silence from my family was absolute. It was a new kind of quiet, not the silence of ignoring me, but the ringing, shell-shocked silence of a direct hit. The explosion of their rage was inevitable. I just didn't know when it would come. It came on Friday, in the form of a call from my father. His voice was stripped of all warmth, a cold, hard instrument of command. "We are having a meeting, Sunday, at our house, 5 o'clock. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. A year ago, I would have meekly agreed. A month ago, I would have nervously made an excuse. But the woman who had been publicly humiliated in her own office and then hired a lawyer was someone new. Someone they hadn't met yet. "No," I said, my voice calm and even. The single word hung in the air between us, a new and unfamiliar sound. "I won't be meeting you at your house." I could hear his sharp intake of breath, the prelude to an argument. I cut him off. "But I will meet you. I want us to talk. All of us. We will meet this Tuesday at 4 p.m. at the offices of Dr. Anya Miles. She is a family therapist. I will send you the address. If you want to talk to me, it will be there. I had spent 2 days rehearsing that speech, and it came out exactly as I'd planned, an unbreakable, non-negotiable boundary. The therapist's office was a study in deliberate neutrality. Beige walls, abstract art that was chosen specifically to offend no one, and a low, comfortable couch that felt more like a trap than a piece of furniture. Dr. Miles was a calm, centered woman in her 60s with eyes that seemed to see the architecture of a family's pain. I got there 15 minutes early. When they arrived, they walked in as a single, wounded unit. My parents, radiating a palpable aura of betrayal. Mark, looking profoundly uncomfortable, and Lily, who looked like a ghost, her eyes red-rimmed and fixed on the floor. My father, ever the patriarch, tried to take control immediately after the introductions. I think it's important that we understand why Tessa felt it was necessary to threaten her own family with a lawyer, he began, his voice tight with controlled fury. But this wasn't his living room. Dr. Miles held up a hand. "Thank you, Richard," she said gently. "But today, I'd like to give the floor to Tessa first. I'd like everyone to listen, without interruption, to what she has to say." The room fell silent. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. For the first time, I had the floor. I took a breath, the air feeling thin and precious. "This started because I love you," I began, my voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. "Lee, when I saw your pain, it became my pain. I would have done anything to take it away." I looked at each of them. But somewhere along the way, in your grief, you stopped seeing me. I stopped being Tessa. I became a solution, a tool. I became an empty room you could furnish with your own dreams, and you never once thought to ask the room if it minded. I laid it all out. The ambush at dinner. My father's dismissal of my life as a 9-month inconvenience. Lily's whispered, "I thought you loved me." A phrase designed to equate my bodily autonomy with a failure to love. The constant barrage of baby pictures, the phone calls, the emotional siege. My voice grew stronger with every sentence, fueled by the righteous anger of being so completely and utterly unseen. "And then you came to my job," I said, my voice dropping as I recalled the sharp, specific sting of that betrayal. "You took your private pain and you made it a public spectacle, designed to shame me into submission. You put my career and my reputation at risk because you believed your need was more important than my entire life." I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "But the real turning point," I said, my gaze locking with my mother's, "was in my apartment. I screamed that it was my body. And you, Mom, you said the thing that everyone was thinking. You asked what good it was if I wasn't using it. You called me greedy for wanting to keep my own body for myself." My mother flinched as if I had slapped her, a sob catching in her throat. "That's when I understood," I finished, my voice now quiet but unwavering. "You didn't want to hear my no. You were incapable of hearing it. The lawyer's letter wasn't a threat. It was a translation. It was me saying no in the only language you had left me, the only language you were willing to listen to." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the deafening sound of a truth that could no longer be ignored. Have you ever spoken a truth so absolute that it shatters the air around you? When I finished speaking, the beige, neutral room was anything but. My words had become a physical presence, a fifth person sitting on the couch, leaving no room for excuses or justifications. The silence that followed was profound, the kind that presses in on your ears. It wasn't empty. It was dense with the weight of everything I had just laid bare. Dr. Miles let the silence sit for a long moment, a deliberate therapeutic tool. Then, she turned her calm gaze away from me. My father, who had entered the room a general ready for battle, now looked like a man who had lost his map. His anger had collapsed into a stunned, bewildered shame. My mother was crying, but not in the performative way she had in my office. These were quiet, ugly tears, her face buried in her hands. It was Lily that Dr. Miles addressed. "Lily," she said softly. "What did you hear just now?" My sister didn't look up. She just shook her head. A small, violent motion. A single choked sob escaped her. I just wanted a baby," she whispered into her lap, the same defense she'd used from the beginning. But the words sounded different now. They sounded hollow, a flimsy shield against the avalanche of my testimony. "I hear that deep desire, Lily," Dr. Miles said, her voice full of a gentle, insistent pressure. "But that's not what I asked. I asked what you heard your sister say." There was another long pause, and then, slowly, agonizingly, Lily lifted her head. For the first time in months, she looked at me. Not at my womb, not at the solution to her problem, but at me. Her eyes, red and swollen, were searching my face, as if seeing me for the first time. The dam broke. A raw, guttural sob ripped through her, a sound of such profound grief that it seemed to shake the room. "I'm sorry," she gasped, the words torn from her. "Oh God, Tess, I'm so sorry." Dr. Miles remained silent, letting her find the rest of the words herself. Lily's breath hitched, and she looked at me, her face a mess of tears and dawning horror. Not for wanting the baby, but for what I did to you. I forgot you were a person. You were just there. A way to get what I wanted. I didn't let myself see you." Those were the words. That was the truth that had been buried under all the pain. It wasn't a magic cure. It didn't erase the weeks of pressure or the public humiliation. But it was a beginning. It was the first honest sentence she had spoken to me since this nightmare began. My parents remained silent, trapped in their own private reckoning. The war was over. Not won, but simply over. The ceasefire was fragile, the air still thick with the smoke of battle. But the guns had finally fallen silent. We were a family in ruins, and I had no idea if we could ever rebuild. How do you measure healing? It's not a straight line. For 6 months after that first therapy session, our family existed in a state of fragile reconstruction. We kept going to Dr. Miles's office every other Tuesday. The conversations were like navigating a minefield in slow motion. We were all learning a new, clumsy language of boundaries and accountability, a dialect in which the word no was a complete sentence, and "I feel" was not an attack. The easy warmth was gone, replaced by a careful, deliberate respect. My parents, who had once seen my life as a resource for the family, now asked questions about my work with a tentative curiosity. Mark, who had been the chief salesman for my sister's dream, now spoke to me about neutral topics like sports and home repairs. It was strained. It was awkward. But beneath the surface of the discomfort, for the first time in a very long time, it was honest. Then, on a quiet Thursday in early May, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen was Lily. A year ago, that sight would have been a welcome interruption. 6 months ago, it would have been a trigger, a summons to manage her pain. Now, it was just a question mark. My hand hesitated over the screen, a muscle memory of anxiety tightening in my chest. I answered, my voice more guarded than I intended. "Hey, Lee." Her voice was different. The desperate, pleading undertone that had been its constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by a calm I hadn't heard in years. "Hey, Tess. Is now a good time?" There was no manufactured crisis, no emotional preamble. We talked for a few minutes about trivial things, a new client of mine, a series she was watching. It was so unnervingly normal that I found myself bracing for the inevitable pivot, but it never came. Instead, she took a breath and said, "I wanted to tell you something. Mark and we've started the process. We submitted our preliminary application for adoption." She just said it. A simple, declarative statement of fact. She wasn't asking for my opinion. She wasn't seeking my approval or asking for my help. She was just sharing a piece of her life with her sister, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if that's what we had always been. I was so stunned I could barely speak. "Wow, Lee," I finally managed, the word catching in my throat. That's wonderful news. Really." We talked for a few more minutes about the agency and the paperwork, and then we said goodbye. I put the phone down on the counter and stood there in the silence of my sunlit kitchen. And then it hit me, a wave of relief so profound and overwhelming that my knees felt weak. It was over. The weight I had been carrying for nearly a year, the constant grinding pressure of her need, had finally, completely, lifted. In that moment, a shocking realization bloomed in my mind. My refusal, the boundary I had fought so viciously to defend, hadn't destroyed her dream of a family. It had liberated it. By refusing to be the answer, I had forced her to find a different question. By protecting my own life from being consumed by her pain, I had inadvertently pushed her toward a healthier, more hopeful path, one that was entirely her own. I walked over to the large window in my living room, the one that overlooked the small, intricate garden I had designed and planted for myself. It was thriving. I had defended not just my body, but my life. And in doing so, I had given my sister the space to finally find hers. What does peace actually feel like? For years, I thought it was the pristine silence of my apartment after a long day, the quiet satisfaction of a blueprint perfectly executed. I was wrong. Peace, I discovered 2 years later, is the joyful chaos of a 1-year-old giggling as he methodically pulls every single book off the lowest shelf of a bookcase. His name is Leo, and he has my sister's eyes and my brother-in-law's stubborn chin. He is my nephew. His arrival didn't erase the past, but it did something more important. It built a new future on top of the ruins. The family dinners, once a stage for psychological warfare, were now boisterous, messy affairs, dictated by Leo's nap schedule and his affinity for throwing food. The tension that had once been the main course was gone, replaced by the easy, exhausted camaraderie of people united in their love for a tiny, demanding human. My role in this new world was one I cherished, a role I had chosen. I was Aunt Tessa, the fun one. I was the architect of magnificent block towers and the purveyor of forbidden sips of soda. I would spend a Saturday afternoon on my hands and knees, making animal noises until my throat was sore, and then, at the end of the day, I would hand a tired, happy toddler back to his parents, kiss them all goodbye, and retreat into the beautiful, ordered silence of my own life. It was a perfect symbiosis. I could give him my love, freely and without reservation, because it was not a requirement. Tonight's dinner was a classic Sunday roast. Leo, having successfully tired himself out by attempting to feed a piece of potato to the dog, grew fussy in Mark's arms. He wriggled and whined, his little face crumpling. Then his eyes found me across the table. He made a grabby motion with his hands, a clear and undeniable summons. A year ago, that gesture might have sent a phantom chill down my spine. Now, I just smiled. "Come here, little man," I said, and Mark gratefully handed him over. I settled into the armchair in the corner of the living room, Leo's warm little body snuggled against my chest. His fussing subsided, replaced by the soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing as he drifted to sleep. I just sat there, breathing him in, A perfect, temporary moment of peace. A few minutes later, I noticed my mother standing in the doorway just watching us. The anger and shame that had defined our last few encounters were gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful expression I hadn't seen in a long time. She walked over and sat on the ottoman near my chair, her gaze soft on her sleeping grandson. "He loves you so much," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," I whispered back. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, and then she said the words that finally, truly, healed the last of the wound. "You know," she said, looking from Leo's sleeping face to mine, her eyes clear and honest. "I'm glad everything turned out this way. Exactly this way." A genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face. It was an absolution I didn't know I still needed. "Me too, Mom," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Me too." As I held my nephew, a child brought into our family by a different road, I finally understood. I had fought a war for my own body, for my own life. But in winning it, I hadn't just saved myself. I had saved all of us from a love built on obligation and sacrifice. I had given us a chance to build a family on something far stronger, the simple, revolutionary freedom to choose.